In the blood-soaked streets of revolutionary Paris, where the guillotine's blade fell daily and mercy had become a forgotten virtue, one execution stands apart from all others, not for its method, but for its unspeakable brutality. The death of Princess Marie Therese Louise de Savoie-Carignan, known as the Princess de Lamballe, represents perhaps the most savage act of mob violence in an era already defined by unprecedented cruelty. What happened to this gentle noblewoman on September 3, 1792, would shock even the hardened revolutionaries who witnessed it. The Princess d'Amballe was no ordinary victim of revolutionary justice. She was the closest confidant of Marie Antoinette, a woman whose loyalty would ultimately cost her everything. Born into privilege, but marked by personal tragedy, she had dedicated her life to serving the French crown with unwavering devotion. Her story is one of friendship, sacrifice, and a loyalty so absolute that she chose death over betrayal, a decision that would lead to one of history's most horrifying public executions. To understand the full horror of what befell the Princess d'Amballe, we must journey back to the blood-soaked days of 1792, when France had descended into revolutionary madness and the mob's thirst for aristocratic blood seemed unquenchable. This is not merely a story of political upheaval, but of how quickly civilization can collapse into barbarism and how the noblest of human qualities, loyalty and friendship, can become death sentences in times of chaos. The events surrounding her death reveal not just the brutality of revolutionary France, but the depths to which human nature can sink when fear, hatred, and mob mentality take hold. What you're about to discover about Princess d'Ambale's final hours will challenge everything you thought you knew about the French Revolution's capacity for cruelty. Her execution was not simply a killing. It was a deliberate act of psychological warfare designed to break the spirit of the imprisoned royal family. The revolutionaries knew that by torturing and mutilating Marie Antoinette's dearest friend, they could inflict a wound upon the queen that would be deeper than any physical harm they could cause her directly. Marie Therese Louise de Savoie-Carignan was born on September 8, 1749, into the noble house of Savoy, one of Europe's oldest and most prestigious royal families. Her early life was marked by both privilege and profound loss, experiences that would shape her into the devoted and tragic figure she would become. At 17, she entered into an arranged marriage with Louis Alexandre de Bourbon, Prince de Lamballe, the heir to one of France's wealthiest noble families and a cousin to King Louis XX. The marriage, typical of aristocratic unions of the era, was more political alliance than love match. The young Prince d'Amballe was known for his dissolute lifestyle, gambling, and numerous affairs. Hardly the ideal husband for the sensitive and devout Mars. The union lasted barely a year before tragedy struck in May 1768, when the prince died suddenly, possibly from syphilis contracted through his promiscuous behavior, leaving his 18-year-old widow devastated and alone. Rather than retreat from court life or remarry, the newly widowed Princess d'Amballe chose to dedicate herself to service and friendship. Her grief had transformed her into a deeply compassionate woman who sought meaning through helping others. It was this quality that would soon bring her into the orbit of another young woman struggling with the pressures of royal life, Marie Antoinette, the Austrian-born Dauphine who had recently arrived at Versailles. The friendship that blossomed between Marie Antoinette and the Princess d'Amballe was genuine and deep, built on shared experiences of loss, displacement, and the suffocating expectations of court life. Marie Antoinette, homesick and struggling to adapt to French customs, found in the princess a kindred spirit who understood the loneliness that could exist even in the grandest palaces. The princess, in turn, found purpose in providing the emotional support and unwavering loyalty that the future queen desperately needed. When Marie Antoinette became queen in 1774, she created the position of superintendent of the household specifically for her dear friend, a role that came with significant influence and a generous salary of 150,000 livres annually. This appointment would prove to be both a blessing and a curse, elevating the princess to unprecedented power for a woman at court, while also making her a target for those who resented the queen's Austrian origins and perceived The early years of Marie Antoinette's reign were marked by mounting criticism of the royal family's spending and lifestyle, criticism that inevitably extended to the queen's inner circle. The Princess d'Amballe, as the queen's most visible companion and confidant, became a lightning rod for public resentment. Pamphlets and broadsheets began to circulate, painting her as a corrupting influence who encouraged the queen's supposed excesses and foreign sympathies. Despite the growing hostility toward the royal family and their associates, the Princess d'Amballe never wavered in her loyalty. She understood that her position made her vulnerable, but she also recognized that Marie Antoinette needed her friendship more than ever as the political situation deteriorated. The princess had witnessed firsthand the queen's struggles with motherhood, her husband's initial coldness, and the relentless criticism from both the court and the public. The princess's devotion extended beyond mere friendship to encompass a genuine belief in the divine right of monarchy and the importance of maintaining tradition in an increasingly chaotic world. She saw herself as a guardian not just of the queen's emotional well-being, but of the institution of monarchy itself. This sense of duty would prove unshakable even as the revolutionary storm clouds gathered on the horizon. As the 1780s progressed and France's financial crisis deepened, the political atmosphere became increasingly toxic. The princess watched with growing alarm as pamphlets became more vicious, as crowds grew more hostile, and as even moderate voices began calling for radical changes to the monarchy. Yet through it all, she remained steadfast in her support for Marie Antoinette, becoming a pillar of strength during the queen's darkest hours. The friendship between the two women had evolved beyond mere companionship into something approaching sisterhood. They shared everything: hopes, fears, secrets, and sorrows. The princess had been present for the births of the royal children and had served as a surrogate mother figure when official duties kept the queen occupied. This deep emotional bond would ultimately seal the princess's fate, for in the minds of the revolutionaries, her loyalty to Marie Antoinette made her equally guilty of crimes against the people. The French Revolution erupted in 1789 like a powder keg that had been building pressure for decades. Years of financial crisis, social inequality, and political incompetence had created a perfect storm of resentment that would ultimately sweep away not just the monarchy but much of the old aristocratic order. For the Princess d'Amboise, who had spent her entire adult life within the protective bubble of Versailles, the revolution represented an existential threat to everything she held dear. The early days of the revolution were marked by a cautious optimism among some moderates that reforms could be achieved without completely dismantling the monarchy. The princess, like many in the royal circle, initially hoped that concessions and compromises might satisfy the revolutionaries' demands while preserving the essential structure of royal authority. This hope would prove tragically naive as events spiraled rapidly beyond anyone's control. By 1791, the situation had deteriorated dramatically. The royal family's attempted flight to Varennes had been thwarted and public opinion had turned decisively against the monarchy. The Princess de Lamballe found herself in an increasingly precarious position as her close association with Marie Antoinette made her a prime target for revolutionary justice. Friends and advisors urged her to flee France while she still could, to seek safety in the courts of Europe, where her noble birth would be protection rather than liability. The princess faced an agonizing choice that would define her legacy. She could abandon her friend and flee to safety, preserving her life, but betraying the deepest bond she had ever known. Or she could remain loyal to Marie Antoinette fully, aware that such loyalty might cost her everything. For a woman who had defined herself through service and devotion, there was really no choice at all. She would stand by her friend regardless of the consequences. The decision to remain in France was not made lightly or impulsively. The princess understood the risks better than most. Having witnessed the revolutionary crowd's capacity for violence, and having read the increasingly vicious attacks on the royal family in the revolutionary press, she knew that her name appeared regularly on lists of enemies of the people, and she was aware that several of her noble friends had already been murdered by revolutionary mobs. Yet the princess's sense of honor and duty ran deeper than her fear of death. She had made sacred vows of loyalty to her queen and friend, and she believed that abandoning Marie Antoinette in her hour of greatest need would be a betrayal of everything she stood for. Moreover, she recognized that her presence provided crucial, emotional support to the queen, who was struggling with the imprisonment of her family and the collapse of the world she had known. The princess's decision was also influenced by her deep religious faith, which taught her that earthly suffering was temporary, while honor and duty were eternal. She believed that God would protect